Hey everyone, and welcome to part 2 of my custom Galactus tutorial. If you haven't seen part 1, I'd recommend you go check it out now. In the last video, I fully disassembled the figure and sanded down the joints to avoid paint rub. This was a simple process, kind of time consuming, but in my opinion, fully necessary. In today's video, I'm going to walk you through how I made Galactus's belt and the base of his helmet. I made this all using a material called plasticard or polystyrene. This material is basically just sheets of thin flexible plastic that can easily be cut into any shape you need. This was extremely useful in this process because these sections just wouldn't be able to be sculpted. They're too big and they're not really on anything. This process ended up being a lot more time consuming and more difficult than I had expected. There was a lot of trial and error involved in this process. First things first, for the belt, I cut out a series of basic shapes that you can see here. These would all end up coming together into one giant piece, but needed to be separate in order to be more accurate and flex better. Some of the pieces were also stacked on top of each other and glued down to provide more detail and depth. I could have sculpted this, but if I had, the epoxy that I use, either Milliput or Aves, both don't flex, so none of these pieces would be able to flex anymore, making a super rigid belt piece that the legs couldn't move around in. Next up, I built up a small layer of epoxy sculpt so that the belt would be able to sit off of the body a little and allow the legs to move around. This ended up removing the ab crunch's ability to function entirely, but that was fine since the ab crunch was loose to begin with and the diaphragm swivel still functioned. I toyed around with a lot of different ways to attach this belt to the body, but just kept hitting brick walls. I wanted the belt to be able to come off of the body to allow me to paint the legs easier, but this was genuinely confusing. Here's past me describing more in depth the process that I was going through. Okay, so I realized when I was finishing this up that I wouldn't be able to just explain this in pictures, so I busted out the camera to try to show what I'm doing. So I've got all of the pieces put together into one giant cohesive belt piece with a magnet right there. And then Captain America's got this belt going around just to raise this off of him a little bit, and a magnet here in the center. So what the goal of this was going to be was that this attaches on the front with a magnet. Then there's a magnet right here that would attach to these two. But when I got them all together, the pull isn't strong enough to keep them on anymore. So I've got to rethink all of this, basically. I ended up just gluing the back pieces together after it wrapped around to secure it to the body, even though that's not what I wanted to do. I couldn't remove the belt anymore, but because of the front magnet, the belt could still shift up and down, allowing me to access the legs for painting. This also allowed the legs to move up a little bit more, because the belt would then pop off of the magnet and shift up the torso. I cut out an additional simple rectangle piece for the belt and wrapped that around and glued it on. I also glued on those little diamond pieces you saw earlier to finish off the look of his belt. You can't really see it that well, but there was a lot of gappage inside the belt with all the layers stacked up, so I went in with some epoxy and smoothed everything out. It's a little hard to see in the picture, but trust me, it helps a lot. And with all that, the belt/skirt is finally done. This was actually pretty difficult since it was my first time with the material, and it took me around 3 hours total of just continuous trial and error. With that done, I got started on the helmet. Quickly wrapped some plasticard around the upper section of Cap's helmet, and bam! We have Chef Boyardee. Project done. But no, really. I followed that up with cutting out a bunch of more shapes, 2 large bases, and full smaller accent pieces. These would make up his little horn, ears, things, whatever. Then of course those were all glued together to create more depth. I got my Dremel out and carved 2 notches in Cap's helmets on the ears to allow for the pieces to slot in. This gives the system a bit more structural integrity instead of just gluing the pieces down. So with the pieces glued in and secured, I moved on to the top where I inserted a disc to cap off the helmet. In order to get the disc to sit where I needed it to, I bundled up a bunch of pieces of tape and shoved them down inside the helmet to allow me to get that certain level of elevation on the piece. And with all that, his helmet is done, at least as far as the plasticard stuff goes. I'll be going in with more sculpt to finish off the shape of the helmet and smooth all the transitions between helmet and plastic, and I'll also add a lot more detail in the sculpt to step it up a notch. That'll do it for part 2 of my custom Galactus tutorial. The sky is finally starting to take shape and I'm blowing myself away at the progress I'm making. Hope you guys are enjoying this and maybe learning something too. I mean, that is the purpose of this after all. Finals week is coming up, so I'm not sure how the pace of this project will turn out, but be sure to check out part 3 whenever it does hit.